Good morning on this Sunday, January 22nd, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. Tensions rise over a proposed police training site. A protester is dead, a Georgia state trooper recovering after being shot. Also, debate begins on the almost $33 billion state budget that includes pay raises for state employees, tax cuts, and more money for the Hope Scholarship. Also, Georgia's Attorney General weighs in on the Cobb County drama over district maps. Melita, Phil, and Martha are all here. Bobby Capel is here filling in for Theron. Welcome back.
Thank you.
All right, the debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Tensions over the planned police training facility have brewed for more than a year and escalated this week. Investigators say shots rang out during an operation to remove people from the area. In the end, a protester was dead, a police officer wounded. The Atlanta City Council approved the $90 million training facility for police and first responders during the summer of 2021.
Police defend the forest!
Opponents of the so-called Cop City say it sits on city land at a key road in DeKalb County's South River Forest, and protesters believe it's up to them to protect it. Last year, protests turned violent. Police say protesters threw rocks and a Molotov cocktail at police as police escorted construction crews onto the property. Vandals destroyed surveillance cameras in the nearby Boulder Walk neighborhood. Someone opened fire on a technician sent in to repair the cameras. Last month, the GBI charged 6 protesters with domestic terrorism. They're accused of attacking EMTs and police. During a search of the forest, the GBI says it found explosives, gasoline, and road flares.
We're dealing not with protesters, but with criminals.
Earlier this month, Governor Brian Kemp tweeted that anyone who used violence against law enforcement at the site would be arrested and charged. He reiterated that the state remains committed to bringing criminals to justice. Melita, to you first this week. We have been discussing these protesters for a year. Why have they been allowed to just set up camp?
I'm not sure why they were allowed to set up camp, but we have to remember that all of those who have been charged with domestic terrorism are not from Georgia. This issue has attracted a group of out-of-state protesters who don't rely on the nonviolent practices that Atlanta has been known for. The other thing I think that's lost in all of this is that 2/3 of the site that was the old city prison farm in unincorporated DeKalb County, a 385-acre parcel, 2/3 of that is still supposed to be parkland. And so I think the city and the proponents of the police training facility have done a very poor job of that. But with that said, the protesters who are local feel misled, feel unheard, and feel like an earlier bargain to make the entire site parkland has been set aside.
Phil, I have to agree with Melita on this. The communication on that issue has been poor. I don't think a lot of people realize that so much of that land will remain a park. And just the fact that these protesters are coming from out of state to do this kind of violence is just unacceptable.
Well, obviously it is unacceptable. I'll go back to your first question. Why was this allowed to fester for a year? And I have to blame the multi-jurisdictional law enforcement agencies and their supervisors.
It's very reminiscent of the Wendy's.
Well, it is.
Right?
And you know what? That's a very good point. We allowed this lawlessness to go on, and what happens when you have permissiveness? It just is going to fester. Now, you're partially right. Some of these are out-of-staters, but there is an Antifa movement in Atlanta that's very radical. It's Marxist, it's left-wing. Let's know who these people are. Some of them are legitimate protesters, but some of them are hardcore Marxists, some of them are anarchists. I'm not calling names, that's what they call themselves. And some of them are just drug-addled young people who are used as useful idiots. So I think there ought to be more of a crackdown. I think that we ought to have the governor and we ought to have our state attorney general go ahead and use the RICO statute that we have in this state, because the Antifa unit in Atlanta is connected to Portland. They say this themselves. You can read their tweets. So it is a terrorism that's going on, and we have to have tough prosecution. I think they still need to clean the vermin out of the forest. They haven't finished the job yet.
Well, Bobby, Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens told the Rotary Club of Buckhead the city plans to provide police protection to construction crews once they start building it. But man, I would be afraid if I had a family member who was part of this construction crew.
Well,
and we got to give, I mean, big kudos to Brassville Gorey for not pulling out and just sticking this through.
They owe it to those workers. I mean, those workers are human beings like the rest of us who have families, who wake up in the morning and are going to go build this facility. They deserve to be protected by the city, who is the one who's putting this out there. Anyways, for I would just say this, that this country was built, and the city of Atlanta in many ways was built on the backs of peaceful protesting.
Yes.
This is a stain on peaceful protesting when you're going to shoot a police officer with a gun. Completely unacceptable. They cannot be surprised when there's return fire. I don't know the specific facts of the case, but this kind of behavior is not peaceful protesting. Also, this was a measure that was passed a couple years ago now by the Atlanta City Council. The way to influence policy is to vote out the people you don't like or vote in the people you do like. It is not to shoot the people who are enforcing the law.
And I think that's a really important point, Martha, that we've said all along in talking about these protesters, is that it's one thing to protest peacefully. It's another thing when it ratchets up like this.
Well, and duly elected people had a long process determining what to do with this site. They voted on it. To your point, if you weren't happy with those folks, there's been an election since they voted it in. It could have been voted out and different things could have been done. But I agree with Phil, the multi-jurisdictional aspect of it has made it more difficult to deal with, because if these folks are coming in and out, leaving Georgia, going to wherever they came from, which we've seen some of that, that means the feds have to be involved. And you know, I don't think that the average police person knows how to clear a forest. It might be that the Georgia National Guard is going to have to be called out to actually clear this space to be able to make sure it's safe for people to go forward. But this is not the kind of protesting that people talk about.
Right.
This is reminiscent of Portland and that kind of thing.
Phil.
Let me make a quick footnote here. I agree that peaceful protests, that's what this country's about. But Antifa and these radicals don't care about a peaceful protest. They care about hijacking a peaceful protest like we saw in 2020. And when the police stand by and do nothing, this is exactly what's going to happen. A lot of people predicted there'd be violence here. And so I just think that we need to have the crackdown. And Martha, I do think we have the manpower and the equipment to clean them out. I think there ought to be some will on the FBI and the GBI. And as I said, we need to go to the full extent and clean them out.
All right. Melita.
Well, the protester who died himself, it quoted in a Bitter Southerner article from December, talked about nonviolent protest and talked about being peaceful and talked about his own fear in these protests. And that was a really good article, and I commend it to people to read.
All right, well, we want to switch gears to Governor Brian Kemp's international travel to Davos, Switzerland, where he made a pitch to companies and the audience that Georgia is a great place to do business. Melita, he also said he was proud to share his conservative values with the elite crowd.
While wearing his cowboy boots, talking about Georgia will keep rocking and rolling, and suggested that they fix the dang border.
Phil.
Well, when I first heard that he was going to Davos, I was thinking to myself, why in hell would he be going to Davos, where you have these globalist elites and a lot of people like George Soros who hate America? But on second thought, I said, well, you know what? He has done a great job, as we all have noted on the panel, making this the #1 state to do business in, and he wants to talk to CEOs. And so I get that part, and I was glad that he lectured some of these one-worlders and leftists that we need to have secure borders, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's great. As a PR person, I would have advised him to do one thing. Don't surprise all of the folks on the political right, and also some on the political left that don't like the World Economic Forum. I would have just said, I'm going here into the lion's den, and I'm going to preach free enterprise and public-private partnerships, et cetera.
Bobby, what do you think of seeing him up on stage?
I actually, you know, let's put his talking points about conservative credentials or whatever and the border stuff aside. I actually think it's really important for governors and the governor of the state of Georgia to be out and about. This is a global, whether you like it or not, this is a global world we live in, and there is business to be done by attracting companies and businesses and partnerships to the state of Georgia. So I think it's actually important. And
even Donald Trump went to the World Economic Forum twice.
Well, good for him. But I think it's important. I mean, you are the chief cheerleader for the state of Georgia when it comes to business. Get out there and do it. I think it's
Well, and they're bringing a governor like him that's had great success through the pandemic. He defended that position through the pandemic. He did a fantastic job representing Georgia. I'm not one of those righties that thought it was a bad idea. I thought that we want to tell our story. You know, you take a guy like Gavin Newsom from California, who if you think that if California could be managed like Texas, Florida, or Georgia, how much better this entire economy would be. Instead, he's run the middle class out. So we've got a thriving middle class. We've got a state that's got jobs created in almost every county. I think there's 8 counties on that map that hasn't had some kind of new company come in over the last 8 years. You know, from an economic standpoint, there's not much you can complain about.
Melita?
Well, I think the effectiveness of his appearance in Davos is demonstrated by the fact that the Lieutenant Governor of Florida is already sniping and criticizing his appearance as a show of his rising national prominence.
And what's their name? You know, no one knows the name of the Lieutenant Governor of Florida.
All right, everyone. Coming up, debate begins on the state's $33 billion budget. Stay tuned.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
Georgia lawmakers began work on Governor Brian Kemp's $33 billion budget. We were talking earlier during the break when we remember $20 billion and $17 billion budgets. But one of the biggest surprises, Martha, was more money for the Hope Scholarship. Governor Brian Kemp proposed ending the 2-tier system next fall, paying full college tuition for every high school graduate with a B average.
Yeah, that was a big surprise for me. I'll be honest with you. I think everybody who saw that was really surprised by that. I think it is a little confusing. You know, it was a nice tip of the hat to Zell Miller to have the Zell Miller scholarship that was 100%. But it has been a little confusing. And if you want to win back those mushy college brains, then maybe paying full tuition is the way to do it.
Bobby, this was always a big issue for Democrat Stacey Evans, who ran for governor on this issue, and she tweeted, "Hallelujah."
I mean, it's because she brought it to the forefront again, I think a few years ago, that it's got this conversation moving again, and so kudos to her for her role in this. But I think also kudos to the governor for deciding to include this in his budget. My wife went to school on the Hope Scholarship, 100%, back in the day when it was 100%. And I think it's important for students who do well in the state, if we want to retain smart students, the whole brain drain idea, keep them here, let them go to school in Georgia, let them have an education. And we had a huge budget surplus, and I don't think there's any better use for a budget surplus than investing in the students of Georgia, both on this end and then also on the pre-K end, which I think we can have
I want to say
discussion
just
for
real
another day.
quickly, whether it passes or not, even in the state that the Hope Scholarship's in today, it is still the best scholarship program in the country.
It is.
True.
Yeah.
And Phil, I couldn't be happier. I have a 9th grader, so we're
timing.
We're nearing that.
I think all parents and students are happy, and you know, yeah, I always appreciated when Stacey Evans made that an issue back in 2018 when she
Yes.
was going. But there's a lot of Republicans who were for this too. Come on, we just had to get the money, and I praise the governor for doing that. And also, let's buy more lottery tickets too to help the kitty.
Melita.
Well, I think it's also interesting that you have new appropriations chairs, you have new leadership for the House and the Senate, and they're taking a little bit of a different approach by bringing in audit reports, looking at state debt. So they're taking a different approach to the budget, which is very thoughtful.
Well, during the budget hearings, DHS Commissioner Candace Brose made an emotional speech that she was, quote, hell-bent on ending the practice of temporarily housing some foster kids in hotels rather than in foster or group homes. Phil, I mean, this is an issue near and dear to my heart. I help DFACS with communications work, and Commissioner Brose made this impassioned plea that it's going to take more money and more foster parents just stepping up to help solve this problem. It is not easy. It's very complex.
Well, it is very complex, and I think you made a good point here. We have to remember why it's so complex. Some of the people going into the foster care system need to be vetted better. Some of these are just violent people that you just cannot house with foster parents, for example. We're talking about putting them in hotels. I hope that can be phased out, but we need more facilities and we need more funding. And I think that I'm glad that she made this speech because it's gotten a lot of attention of a lot of lawmakers.
And that's why I wanted to bring it up. Melita.
Well, there's a lack of foster families, but more funding will help all of that. And, you know, the foster care system is the last hope and last gasp for many children. And so you can't really vet them better. They end up there as a last resort.
Well, if they're violent, you need to be vetting them.
Bobby, there is a mental health component to this as well for these kids.
There is, of course, and the reality is, in a perfect world, we hope that every child has the ability to grow up in a family, whether it be with their own parents or somebody else who's willing to foster them and able to do that. It's challenging, is one of the many challenges in the state to try and figure out, not just in the state, to figure out how to push this forward. But anything that shines a light on the issue, like that speech, I think is a positive step.
Well, and I think I'm glad she included group homes in the discussion too, because part of the answer is going to be not only great foster parents, but being able to have a group home situation. I think in theory, the foster home situation is a great concept. But again, having enough homes, having enough parents, that sometimes it's better to have a group home where a child can stay, because the average foster child is in 11 homes, you know, so it's hard for a child to grow up normally if they're in 11 homes in the course of their childhood. So we've got a lot of work to do there, but I know Candace is going to be up to it.
Yes, she is. And I'll tell you, you know, last year there was a big emphasis on putting more money to mental health. So let's hope that happens this year with DFACS.
Yes.
All right. Well, Department of Public Health Commissioner Dr. Kathleen Toomey also testified this week that Georgia's maternal mortality rate actually worsened during the pandemic. Melita, I know this is an issue that you bring up often, and just to hear that these numbers are going to be worse is a little alarming.
It's very alarming because we're already worse than many third world countries in Georgia. And study after study says that the lack of Medicaid coverage, which we have adjusted last year, is a problem that could help this issue. But Georgia needs not to be last in maternal mortality.
Martha.
Look, the biggest lie that we tell is that if you don't have insurance, you can't go to the doctor. And media does that all the time. And what you have to do is communicate and be able to find the resources that you have to be able to get to the doctor. But it is tragic, because you're right, this shouldn't be happening, not just in Georgia, but it shouldn't be happening anywhere. And so that we've got to keep working on this issue. And again, I'm glad that Dr. Toomey brought it to light, because if you don't talk about it, it's hard to talk about. If you don't talk about it, you're never going to solve it.
Melita?
And more than 2/3 of Georgia's counties are underserved by medical professionals.
Absolutely.
And so it's hard to go to a doctor when you don't even have a doctor nearby, and you don't have transportation.
And we have increased the number of residency spaces in Georgia, and that was important, but we haven't increased the overall number of spaces in medical school for a very long time. We have this shortage across the board, and you're right, Melita, we're not going to fix that shortage unless we expand the ability to get the education.
That's right. The key is the shortage here.
Yes.
Bobby, I want to bring you in on this.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I just think that this system in Georgia, in America, when it comes to healthcare, is broken. It has been broken for years. It has been broken for various amounts of different reasons. It's broken for some people on one end of the spectrum, for other people on the other end of the spectrum. It's the reason I even got into politics years ago, was to run for Congress, was to get in and try and get the healthcare system going and fixed on the right. And we haven't done it. Here we are 5 years later, and nothing has changed. It is, if you own your own business also, and you're trying to get healthcare on the exchange, you cannot get great coverage right now. You are covered with pre-existing conditions, which is an important first step from the Obamacare back in the day, but there is so many problems, and the cost associated with going to the doctor. You know, yes, you can go to a doctor, and then they can surprise you with a bill in the mail for thousands of dollars, and then you don't go the next time. You know, so it's broken. It's a human right. We have the money in this country to fix it.
Phil.
Well, I think you're making some good points. However, I think you're a little bit harsh. We still have some of the finest medical facilities and people and research in the world, so I disagree with that.
I agree with that. No, I agree with the doctors and the researchers.
Okay, so we have a fine medical system that needs reform in some key areas. Let's be clear in what we're saying here. So I think some of you have made some good points, but I do think we go back to, even in Georgia, a shortage of nurses. We have to have reform on insurance, but I just wanted to clarify that you were a little bit harsh in your first remarks.
Melita.
And at some point, the rah-rah Chamber of Commerce, let's bring in new industry folks, have to realize that access to health care is an important part of the equation in recruiting industry.
All right, we'll leave it there. Coming up, Georgia's Attorney General weighs in on the Cobb County Commission's move to draw their own district maps, calling it inappropriate.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
In the ongoing saga over Cobb County's electoral maps, Georgia Attorney General Chris Carr said the move made by Democratic commissioners to redraw the lines is not legally binding and inappropriate. Martha, your take on this, because you weren't here. Does this matter much as it plays out in court?
You know, I don't know that it matters much at this point in time. It's going to have to play out in court, and it just feels like at this point in time, changing the lines is just as confusing as the original lines that were drawn. You know what I'm saying? And we always talk about participation and people being involved, but if you've got your local lines, which are the most important elections you vote in, those are the people that have the most impact on really your day-to-day life and the money you have. And then they change them every year. That's a problem.
There are a lot of chaotic twists and turns on this one.
Well, this is nothing new. Politicians have been picking their voters for decades across the state of Georgia, all right? And that is not going to change anytime. No, all across America and probably across the world. But, you know, this is gerrymandering at its finest from the local level. The state level wants to do it. The Republicans want to go one way. Democrats want to do it another way. There's certain Democrats in the State House that want to do it one way. And everybody wants to protect their own seats. That's the bottom line here. And until we get some sort of bipartisan coalition to fix this in the state level, it's going to be like this forever.
Well, you're dreaming about a bipartisan coalition, right. But anyhow, let's look at the law here, and we can laugh about all this and the changing. The law, Chris Carr, the Attorney General, is right. It's unconstitutional. The state constitution specifically says the legislature has the right to draw these districts. We're talking about county commission districts in Cobb County. And what's going to happen, yes, there's going to be a court case. It's very important because the Cobb County Democrats are claiming we have the right to do it under home rule. No, home rule does not allow that. And there's going to be a plaintiff, probably one of the Republican commissioners, and Chris Carr can then join and then set this confusion straight.
All right, well, until something happens, I promise not to bring it up because we've been talking about this for weeks. An interesting turn of events regarding former state representative Vernon Jones and his use of Facebook. According to the AJC, a federal judge ordered Jones to pay some $45,000 in damages and legal fees to a man he blocked on his Facebook page while serving in the legislature. Bobby, any insight on this case? Because I would imagine a lot of politicians delete Facebook comments.
No,
and
I
yes,
actually,
we even delete our Facebook comments on Georgia Gang.
I'm actually
surprised.
Those
of you who are very mean.
I would like to know more about the case because it's actually interesting. Kind of silly, but you know, paying somebody $45,000 for Facebook comments or something? I don't know. That's beyond my pay grade.
Phil?
Well, we're making a point. We don't know what was deleted. And obviously, if it's a call to violence or if it's libelous, you delete it. And I think that, though, if you're a public official and you've got a Facebook page, though, you need to get feedback from your constituents. And they have a First Amendment right. Or don't put up your Facebook page.
Well, you need to hear the good and the bad.
Right.
And that's what we do on our Georgia Gang Facebook page, unless they cross the line. Melita.
Well, I think it's almost like social media posters are going to have to start consulting with their lawyers about what they can and can't do about their accounts.
Yeah.
Well, my rule of thumb is if you use profanity when you engage with me, I block you. Okay, so that's just a good rule.
My rule of thumb is if you want to kill me, I'll block you.
And we just say that we'll pray for those folks. So.
Yes,
all right,
right,
coming up, winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
All right, Martha, we'll start with you this week.
Well, of course, I'm going to say my winner this week is Governor Brian Kemp for going to Davos and sticking to his conservative values. I loved it, actually. I thought it was great. And his longtime aide, Amelia Hawkins, has taken a job in D.C. And so I'm so excited. I heard from her, and she made the trains run on time. So he's going to miss her, and we're going to miss her. And then, of course, remembering the two folks that lost their lives last week, Devin Willock and Chandler LaCroix, who died in that horrible accident that happened after the parade.
Just tragic.
It was very tragic.
Bobby.
On a bit of a lighter note, my loser, I'm going to start with this, and that is any county who does a school district remote day tacked on after a holiday. Okay? You're screwing the parents. You got it? You're screwing us. Martin Luther King Day is a wonderful day to celebrate the great things that he accomplished. The day after is not a holiday unless it's a holiday. Don't call it a remote work day. Send homework for me to do with my kids for 8 hours, okay? Please.
Tell
us
All right.
how you really feel.
Teacher workday, fine. Remote workday, no. Okay, winner. Hopefully, it's the Georgia students, if indeed the budget gets through and they get to go to college with a B average or above and get the 100% paid for.
Phil.
I agree with that winner, and you stole my thunder on that one. I have another winner, though, and that is the city of Peachtree Corners. I went up to a fascinating place called the Curiosity Lab there. It's actually owned by the city of Peachtree Corners, and those folks, they don't even pay property taxes because they're doing so well with this. If we had a company, we could go there, they experiment on our product. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work. It's for free, they vet them. And so I think it's a wonderful research area, and good for Peachtree Corners.
Great. Melita.
Well, former Georgia Gang panelist Kathy Woolard and her Fulton County Elections Board have been exonerated by the state elections board, and they will not be taking over, and the report cited progress. And so I think they should be called out because they've so often been as a winner, because they've so often been criticized on this program. My other winner is the ACLU of Georgia Executive Director Andrea Young, who will be honored on Thursday at the annual Roses for Roe event. She and her team carried to court the protection of many of the same issues her distinguished father took to the streets decades ago.
Nice. And we have given Kathy Woolard mega shout-outs because we knew she could do it.
I think I might continue to
Congrats.
criticize them, though.
All right. We'll leave it there. Thanks, everybody, so much for joining us. We will see you again next week. Bye-bye.